Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio. And welcome again to another edition of SMNTY Fiction. This is a once-a-month thing that has a bit more sound effects, thanks to the amazing Christina, our super producer. It is ongoing. We are in the second of a trilogy. And this one was originally called Big Things Start Small, but I just called them all Terminus Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, because otherwise I don't know what's going to happen here. It's confusing enough when I'm titling things. So yeah, I would suggest you listen to the other ones first, but you do what you want. I can't tell you what to do. This is something that I wrote for National Novel Writing Month in 2011, I believe, which is when you try to write a novel in a month. And it's a very dystopian, end of the world thing that, looking back now, I'm like, oof. Little did you know what was to come. But I don't really edit them that much because I like looking back at it and talking about it, what was going on in my head at the time. I remember exactly where I was when I wrote this, which I wrote it on pen. I wrote with a pen on paper. And then I had to submit it. You got to type it up. I don't know what I was thinking. But if you heard the last chapter, it was a very introspective chapter. They had just had this really traumatic experience. This one is them talking that out. So, content warning for descriptions of violence, description of murder, nothing too in-depth. Memories of violence, non-explicit descriptions of panic and anxiety. I would say of like low self-worth, illness, end of the world, projecting. Not the healthiest relationship. I think in light of the world they live in, it's understandable. And I'll talk about this a bit more at the end, but like, yeah, not the healthiest of relationships. So, a recap. Yes, there is this virus that's really decimated the human population. It turns out it was released purposefully by the religious component of the US government. And they had a vaccine, but they destroyed it all because they would rather have power than help people. And they did have 2 vaccines. They saved one for Madison, who is their grandson. And Tilda managed to get him the vaccine and broadcast, Tilda, his mom, broadcast to the world like what they had done. And they flee, and now they're on the run. And they have recently been confronted by a rogue group who attacked them, and Tilda was forced to kill them with the help of Madison. It's the first time Madison has had to do something like that. So they're dealing with the fallout of all of that. On top of that, they've got this call from the leader of this underground rebellion, who's saying like, hey, we need you to come back to DC because we can make a vaccine, but we need your son Madison to do it. And Tilda and Madison have been on the run their whole lives because she illegally, in this world, conception is controlled, children are controlled. So she ran away with him. And so they've been on the run this whole time. And she's really struggling with like trust. And I don't know what to believe about any of this. They found this place. They're exhausted. They're going to stay the night there. Tilda has been putting off this conversation she needs to have with Madison about what happened. And that is where we are. Let us get into the fiction. Outside was brittle and crisp, the air sharp in her lungs. The grass crunched beneath her feet as she crossed over to the barn, unlatching the fence. Inside were 2 rows of stables outfitted with tools and pails and saddles. On the other side was a big pen that looked like it had once been used for pigs and cows and other livestock. Long troughs, no feed though. One of these times, she hoped they'd find something for Scout in one of these barns. Tilda went around the back of the farmhouse to the silo on the opposite end. It was a looming, ominous structure, menacing against the horizon. Tilda had never been inside a silo. She wasn't entirely sure what one would look like on the inside. She located a discreet metal door in front of the metal cylinder, having to use her weight to leverage it open. Not that it was that heavy, but that it had been so long since it had been opened. The creak of it wrenching open echoed loudly in the metal canister. It released a breath of stale air. Tilda blinked at the darkness within, not knowing what to expect. It was empty. Just a metal container of nothing. Everything was muted. Her footsteps on crystal granules of dirt swallowed by the emptiness she'd just released from its cage. She felt like if she screamed, there would be no sound. She tread a careful path to the center, spinning in place, looking at the gleaming metal walls. The light from her flashlight was absorbed by the rounded sheets of metal, and what wasn't bounced meagerly around shimmered almost like water on a calm day. Claustrophobia welled up within her, and she desperately sought out the door, retreating out and closing it behind her, hugging her middle. She could feel the nothingness contained inside silently howling behind her, trapped once again in its box. She hurried back to the farmhouse, sliding the lock into place behind her and striding back into the main room where Madison was finishing up with a makeshift bed of especially comfy proportions from the blankets Tilda had tossed down, the flashlight she'd given him balancing on a table. Scout had already closed her eyes, looking comfortable under the hand-sewn quilt tucked around her. Madison sat back on the couch, sinking into the pile of blankets, watching her intently. Tilda plopped down warily in the love seat adjacent, slipping off her pack. She pulled out a water bottle and tossed it to Madison once she'd caught his attention, and then a bag of trail mix for him and a jar of canned fruit for herself. She thought it'd be easiest on her throat. They worked their way through their meal silently, Tilda parsing what she wanted to say. Or trying to, at least. Her thoughts kept screeching to a halt, unable or unwilling to face what addressing them would mean. Madison broke the festering silence first. Are we safe? Tilda couldn't lie. As safe as we can be. For now. He bowed his head of shaggy hair, accepting her answer. This place is really big, he tried. Yeah, Tilda agreed roughly. Madison inspected her, appraising. Are you all right? He asked, his voice wavering delicately. Tilda's throat tightened immediately in response. I'm fine. Her voice was staggered with cracks and fissures. Look, Madison, we need to talk about what happened. His wide gaze held hers, wanting her to explain it, to make it make sense. You killed them to protect me, Madison asserted in a brave voice. Yes, Tilda agreed. I didn't want to, but I had no choice. They were going to take us in. She broke off, unable to give voice to what they had planned for Madison. They were dangerous, she supplied after she'd caught her breath. Her heart was thumping violently. They would have killed us first. Us or them. I know, Madison whispered quietly, staring at his feet. He was hurting you. I thought he was going to kill you. Madison's words became mangled, broken collisions of phrases. He was sobbing, Tilda realized, and doing his best to hide it from her. Cautiously, Tilda stood and approached him, sitting next to her son, the blankets comfortable and mushy beneath her. He crawled into her lap almost the second she sat down, surprising her. Stiffly, she started stroking his back, kissing his forehead. It's okay, she murmured. Hot tears soaked into her jacket. Tilda screwed up her courage. She had to ask. Are you afraid of me, Madison? For a minute, he wept quietly, and Tilda thought she might dissolve into sobs as well. But then he said thickly, No, you protect me. You saved me. Tilda sagged in shocked relief and then hugged him more tightly, fiercely, so grateful at the gift he'd given her. I stabbed him, Madison choked out into her jacket. I stabbed him. Oh, honey, Tilda breathed. You saved me. Ellis would have killed me if not for you. She gave him a gentle shake. You didn't kill him. Just distracted him. You didn't kill him, baby, she emphasized. Why'd they do that? He asked her, heartbroken. Why couldn't they just leave us alone? The world's a dark place. People have been hammered and roughened into creatures of survival, often depraved things driven by instinct. Kindness is the exception, not the rule. They weren't safe. Safety didn't exist anymore, not for them. There were people who wanted to hunt them down and hurt them, and those people were everywhere, lying in wait, watching, dying and willing to kill to have a child like Madison, someone untainted by HSV-5. Everyone's so scared. This is what fear does. It strips away everything else and leaves a monster in its wake, mindless. But of course, she didn't say that. She couldn't. She just stroked his hair. I'm sorry. I wish things were different. You shouldn't have to grow up in a world like this. It was worthless sentiment, but Madison quieted a bit. Tilda started and then stopped, wondering how much she should confide in Madison. He was her only companion, the only person she could talk to. And the fact that she had murdered 2 men in cold blood earlier that day was eating her alive from the inside out. Her skin was crawling with the memory of it. But at the same time, and more importantly, she was his mother. She shouldn't place her burdens on her child. But where then could she place them? I didn't want to kill them. She finally settled on a compromise. Killing should always be the last resort. It takes something from you. You lose a piece of yourself. He climbed out of her lap to sit next to her so he could better look her in the eye. You lost a piece? Madison asked innocently. Yeah, I did. And it was true. She did feel as though something inside her had broken off. She'd felt the same way when she'd shot, and if she was straight with herself, most likely killed, the man in Chicago. Madison seemed to think for a second. I guess maybe I did too. He pulled his knees up to his chest and rested his chin on top of them. I feel different, and I'm worried if I don't help with a vaccine, he specified. I'll just feel guilty for the rest of my life. I'll be a bad, selfish person. Responsible for the death of the human race, Tilda thought, but shoved the thought away. They had a vaccine, she reminded herself forcefully. They were trying to manipulate her and Madison into coming back, but she wasn't going to put Madison into any more danger than they were already clearly in. You're a good kid, you know that? She said fondly, and he flashed her a bewildered look. You're so kind-hearted, and you're always thinking of other people. She paused, pondering the best way to frame what she was going to say. You're not a bad person. You're not selfish. They have a vaccine. And last time we were here with Mark and his friends, they betrayed us. Madison studied her intently. He had probably always suspected that, but not known for sure. They were willing to use you once, and they'd do it again. But if things change, if something happens that proves to me it'd be safe to go back to DC, that they really need us, and we'd help by going back, then we'll go back. I promise. She hoped she wouldn't regret making that promise someday. But until then, I'm not going to put you at risk again. We are in enough danger as it is, and I don't think we can trust Mark. Madison processed all of this, his brow wrinkled with deep thought, his cheek smushed against his knee. Tilda took a final swig from her water bottle, her throat painfully dry after her rather uninspiring speech. "Okay," he finally said. He looked back over to her. "But how will we ever know we can trust someone?" Tilda exhaled slowly, her swollen face giving a rather painful throb. "Trust comes with time, with actions. We'll have to wait and see what they do." More shiny words that amounted to very little, but they were true. He pressed the heels of his hands to his eyes, a very adult gesture. He sucked in a shaky breath. "I'm sorry," he hiccuped. "I'm so sorry." Tilda cupped his cheeks, tilting his face toward hers. "For what, baby? For what?" He sobbed for a moment, fighting an internal battle before he burst out with, "You lost a piece. You lost a piece." His voice morphed into a mangled whisper. "You lost a piece because of me." Tilda's eyes welled up. No, I didn't. None of this was your fault. You're not responsible for the actions of others." Madison looked away, sobbing quietly, trying to shield her from his grief, but she wouldn't let him escape her so easily. This, she couldn't turn away from. "You give me something to hold on to. You make me whole. I would have lost everything, every piece." She gave him a gentle shake of the shoulders. "If not for you. You gave me that. You give me that. Something to live for and a way to piece myself together." Those bright blue eyes stared at her, an entire universe contained behind their glassy surface, a universe to be lost in. They watched her in that way that told her what she was saying was something he was going to remember, something he was trying to take in and figure out the truth of, how it fit in and assimilated into what he knew and what he was. Shifting pieces, rearranging. The responsibility of it unnerved her. She pushed down the crawling, insidious unworthiness that lived in her very skin. "Without you, I'd be nothing. I'd have nothing. So don't you dare blame yourself for the actions of those two men. That's giving them power they don't deserve." Tears cascaded over her fingers, but he held her gaze, his hand coming up to touch her face, taking in the bruising and the puffiness. "I'll be fine," Tilda reiterated, cursing the scratchiness of her voice. "What if they find us? The people he was talking about," he whispered, fear like a stark candle casting light on his face. "We'll keep moving. We'll take smaller roads. We've got Scout." She indicated the sleeping horse with a smile. "They won't find us." She prayed that was the case. Madison nodded hesitantly, wanting to believe. "Let's get some sleep, okay?" Tilda suggested, even though they both knew that any sleep they got would be haunted with ghosts. Madison tightened his grip at her suggestion, a spark of fear igniting behind his eyes. "It's okay," she repeated, switching off his light and gently laying him down on the mountain of pillows and blankets he'd assembled, pulling him close to her chest and tugging a comforter down over both of them. Neither of them shut their eyes, each staring into the darkness. The comforter pulled heat around them, a net of warmth cocooning them. Tilda fought the sleep encroaching upon her, her brain buzzing, until something heavy settled behind her eyes and her brain shut off like a light switch. She dreamt that Madison was gone. She didn't know where he was or how long he had been missing, just that he was gone, and she needed to find him. She'd been reduced to an automaton with only one purpose: her need to find Madison. Her compass, her being, everything, her singular universe. It was cold, but she didn't notice. Her body was dead, her limbs hung limply and swung as she stumbled forward in the never-ending sea of nothing. In her brain was a constant refrain, her catechism. Home is where you are, home is where you are, home is where you are. Looping, constant. A whimpering dredged her from her sleep with a breathy gasp. It was dark, the darkest part of the night. Madison was whimpering softly, squirming, caught in the throes of a nightmare. Her head heavy and confused, Tilda murmured comforting words in Madison's ears, clumsily petting his hair and his arm. Lost at sea, that's how she felt. caught in the waves, not sure which way was which, unable to catch her breath, dehydrated and hungry and shriveled, seasick and homesick and desperate for solid ground. And Madison was lost with her. She wondered what nightmares haunted him tonight. She imagined Ellis and Jake played a large role, and possibly even herself. Her throat seared, her body throbbed, her face burned. She felt weak and flimsy, stiff in some places and soupy in others. Madison quieted and snuggled deeper under the covers. Tilda shut her eyes but felt dizzy, as though she was on a raft rocking and careening over cresting and troughing waves. She swallowed back the nausea rising in her throat, the pain like a shard of glass. She wheezed, opening eyes that were hot in her swollen face. She could see shapes, shadows darting through the room, but she knew she was hallucinating in her exhaustion, her tired and stress-addled brain firing with all the excess nerves generated by the day's events. Her eyes closed, time would pass, and she'd open them again, not truly achieving sleep for the rest of the night. And that brings us to the end of this edition of SMNTY Fiction. I hope that you enjoyed it. As I hinted at before, I apologize for my bad acting. I'm trying not to go overboard, but sometimes I feel like I go underboard in a way.
Yeah.
It's like kind of a mess.
Yeah.
Really, I'm just trying to narrate it in a way that is not jarring.
Right.
So apologies for that. Thanks as always to super producer Christina, who makes these amazing. And I did, as I mentioned, I did want to say, before you yell at me, before you write in, I know that this is not the healthiest relationship. I know. And actually, I've said this before. I'm really excited for us to get to the ending of this story because it's examined. It's talked about because she's basically defining all of her worth through her son. All of her, everything is about Madison. And that will be dealt with later. But I just want you to know, I do know, okay? That's not the healthiest thing. And I think in terms of the apocalypse and the life they've lived, it makes sense that they don't have the healthiest coping mechanisms. They're very attached to each other in a way that is not the healthiest thing. I think it makes sense, but it will be confronted. We will get to it. And yeah, this was it had a pretty intense conversation in this one. And I had forgotten about how they really talked it out. So I hope that you all enjoyed it. I hope that you're continuing to enjoy this. I love hearing from you all about it. And yeah, if there's anything that is in this realm of fiction that we could do that's in the public domain and you would like us to try, we do like doing these, you can email us at stephanieandmomstuff@iheartmedia.com. You can find us on Twitter at momstuffpodcast or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff I'll Never Told You. We're on YouTube. We have a TeePublic store and we have a book you can get wherever you get your books. Thanks as always to our super producer Christina, our executive producer Maya, and our contributor Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff I'll Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.